Hi everybody, this is Laura, City Scrapper. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a layout that I made using the December My Creative Scrapbook limited edition kit. I had been looking on Pinterest quite a bit and I'm really drawn to layouts that have a black background and I wanted to try one out. So I started out with a piece of thick white cardstock and I used some Finnabair black gesso. I could have used a piece of black cardstock, but I was thinking that I wanted the paper to be very thick and I didn't want it to have any texture because I wanted to do some stenciling on the background, so I thought this would be the best way to make this black background. If you've ever worked with gesso before, you may know that it dries very quickly, so I didn't have to wait very long before I could start creating my background. I started off the background with this really beautiful stencil that we got in the kit this month. I love the poinsettias, and I was thinking that the gold would look nice against the black background. In my head, I wanted to use a Prima antique gold texture paste that I had, but when I opened up the container, it was all dried out. And then I looked in another gold texture paste that I had, and that was dried out too. I guess even though I'm always sure to put the lid on very tight, after a while, they do tend to dry out. But luckily, this particular one, this Reese matte metallic gold texture paste, was still in excellent condition, and so I decided to use this one. I used the entire stencil except for the leaves in the top and bottom right hand side. I wanted the poinsettias to almost form a triangle pointing to the right, and it doesn't really look like a triangle right now. Later on, I'm going to add some embellishments to try to make it look a little bit more like it's pointing to the right. But I definitely didn't want it to look like a square, and I was afraid that would have happened if, in this particular case, I included those images in the corners of the stencil. So then I decided that I wanted to add some embossing powder to the texture paste. I'm using Ranger Gold Tinsel embossing powder. I would recommend working in smaller sections and not try to put embossing powder over the entire page the way I did, but I wanted to make sure that I got the embossing powder on there before the texture paste dried. Now I'm using a brush and I'm going in and I am trying to remove any of the excess embossing powder that is in places where it doesn't belong. One nice thing about having the black background is that I can go back in later on and I can cover up any areas that I want to with some black gesso, but I did make an effort to try to brush away any extra embossing powder, and you can see here I'm using a very fine brush and trying to get into those lines. I also tap the back of the layout quite a bit to try to loosen any embossing powder that should probably come off of the layout. Once I had cleared away all of the excess embossing powder, I used my heat tool and I began to emboss these beautiful images of the poinsettias. And even though I emboss quite a bit, I still love watching the embossing powder being set. It's so pretty, and this is a really pretty embossing powder. It's a sparkly gold. I was very happy with the way this particular gold contrasted with the black background. I could have just left the gold texture paste as it was, but it just didn't have the same sparkle that I knew the embossing powder would have. I didn't think it was a waste though to use the gold texture paste because just in case the embossing powder didn't cover an area, I knew that there would be some gold texture paste there. I went back in with a paintbrush and some more of the black gesso just to clean up some of the areas that I felt looked a little bit cloudy or had a little bit of a fine layer of the embossing powder on it. And I think this really helped the image of the poinsettia to stand out. And I didn't include all the footage, but I did spend a little bit of time going in there and layering the gesso in some areas. I wasn't done adding texture paste and embossing powder to the layout. I wanted to add some dots to the left-hand side of the poinsettias. So I drew a line with a pencil just so I would have an idea of where I wanted the dots to go. So I am using a stencil we got in a past My Creative Scrapbook kit, and I thought that this would be just perfect for the look I wanted to create. So once again, I'm using that same gold texture paste, And again, I'm going to use the Ranger embossing powder. I didn't want to smear the dots I had already put down, so I put the dots down in a couple of different stages. First, I put some on the top and the bottom, and then I added the embossing powder. I embossed these dots, and then I went back and I added some more dots in the center. I wanted there to be a lot of sparkly gold on this layout. I didn't want the gold to be on the entire page though, so I'm keeping it to the left-hand side of the layout. I do add touches of gold to most areas of the layout by the end, but the majority of the gold is going to be on the left-hand side. Once I had added a whole bunch of dots on the left-hand side, I went back in with the stencil and added just a few more. I'm using some of the leaves that were in the dimensional flowers that are in this kit, and I'm going to emboss all of them with gold. Like I said, I wanted to have a really glittery layout, and I like the idea of having the leaves matching with that gold theme. Instead of using the Versamark pad, I used this adhesive that's in a bottle, and that works really well too. That's from Michaels. I'm using the same Ranger gold tinsel embossing powder. I embossed each of the leaves 2 times. I always like to have at least 2 layers of embossing powder on whatever I emboss. I just think that the coverage is excellent when there's 2 layers. Now I'm going to start working on my photo. I have my photo that I cut using a Creative Memories oval cutter. I cut that the smallest size. I cut a piece of white paper the next size up, and then I used one of the pattern papers in the kit. That's the red paper, and I made that the biggest size oval, and then I layered them on top of each other. Once I had them all attached together, I traced around the outside of the photo cluster on some fun foam, and I'm going to pop the photo up a little bit off the background. It adds a little bit of dimension to the photo. And I also find that when I have the photo popped up a little bit, it's easier to place dimensional flowers around the outside of it. That little bit of dimension just helps to be able to position those flowers and other embellishments around it. I started off with the photo toward the bottom of the layout. I used some ATG adhesive so it wouldn't be there permanently. I wasn't sure exactly where I wanted to put it, and I moved it up a little bit, but I end up moving it up even a little bit more so that it's closer to being in the center of the layout. I'm using some of the flowers that were included in this month's kit, and you can see that I'm also using those leaves from the kit that I embossed gold, and I'm arranging them all around the photo, and then I'm making another cluster in the upper right-hand corner. In addition to the gold and the off-white flowers on the layout, I like the idea of having these touches of red. So I have a red flower in the upper right-hand corner, and I'm also adding some of these laser cut leaves that were in the kit, and there were just enough so that I could add little touches of them to each of the clusters on the layout. Now I'm using some Liquitex matte super heavy gel medium, and I'm attaching the dimensional flowers down to the layout. This is my favorite adhesive to use when I'm attaching dimensional elements down to the page. This container of gel medium is definitely on its last leg. It's almost used up, but the gel medium that's left is definitely a little drier than it usually is. So I think that after this particular layout, I will have to get a new container of gel medium. Using the gel medium, I attached all of those elements, the flowers, the embossed leaves, and the red leaves down to the area around the photo in the same way that I have them arranged right now. I wanted to add a little bit of the color green to the layout, and I also wanted to fill in those clusters so that they were a little bit fuller. So I take some Martha Stewart punches. I have some holly punches that have 4 leaves on a stem and 2 leaves on a stem, and I used one of the green pattern papers that was in the kit, and I punched out a whole bunch of holly leaves. And now what I'm doing is I'm using my scissors and I'm folding the leaves at the center, and that gives the leaves a little bit more dimension. And I also really like the addition of the green. I think that it makes the layout look a lot more Christmassy. Earlier, I added a die cut heart, that small heart it looks like it has some twine in the center, to the largest flower. I thought that was a nice little touch. It fit right in there perfectly. And the photo that I'm using is a photo of my younger daughter, Julia. This photo was taken in 2019, and I decided that 2019 was going to be the title for this layout. I have a pack of beautiful gold stickers that I got in a previous My Creative Scrapbook kit, and I have used that pack of stickers on so many layouts, so there weren't too many letters left, but luckily there was a 2, a 0, and a 9, and I was able to cut one of the letters to make the number 1, and then just like I did to the background and the leaves, I embossed the numbers so that they would match with the rest of the gold on the layout. I had a few more of those red leaves that I use in both of the clusters, so I placed those underneath the year. And then on top of the year, I have 2 sentiments. One says Christmas and one says Season's Greetings. And I always like to bring the same colors and the same elements when I can to the title cluster so that it ties in with the rest of the layout. I'm using some gel glue to attach down the numbers. I could have used the gel medium to attach the numbers down as well, but because it had gotten so thick, because it was a little old, I decided that the gel glue would be a neater way to attach the numbers down. And because, as I had mentioned, I have holly leaves in the other clusters, I wanted to bring some holly leaves into this cluster. And I had a branch with 2 holly leaves left over, so I tucked that under the red leaves in the bottom cluster. And now I'm attaching down a die cut bow to the top of the layout. I love those bows. I think they're such a nice little decorative touch. Now I was really going for maximum shine and bling on this layout. So I'm using my glossy accents and a whole bunch of gold sequins that I have in my stash, and I'm going to add sequins to a lot of the layout. I'm going to add them to the flowers. I add them to the leaves. I'm also going to add some larger sequins in the background, and I really like the addition of the sequins. The reason that I'm using glossy accents is because I think it's the best adhesive for things like sequins and pearls. The gel glue is great for holding paper to paper, but for things like sequins, I find that if I use gel glue, the sequins will eventually pop off of the page, and I never find that with the glossy accents. It holds embellishments like jewels, sequins, pearls down to the layout very well. I just love the way sequins look on pages. I don't use them as often as I should. They're so pretty and they add so much to the layout. I have to try to remember to incorporate them into more layouts. Well, that was the last touch that I added to this layout, and here are some close-ups. I want to say thank you so much to every single person who's watching this video right now. I'm so honored that you've taken the time out of your day to watch my channel, and I really hope that you enjoyed this video. In the description box, you'll find the link to the My Creative Scrapbook website if you are interested in finding out more about obtaining a subscription to these wonderful kits. I hope that you have a wonderful holiday season, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.